And welcome to today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm your host, Michelle Graves, nationally and internationally known for the last 36 years as the Money Lady. And as always, I remain committed to you, my viewers, to bring you information, people, issues that will enable you to make good, sound financial decisions for you and your family. So as we welcome in the year 2014, I am delighted to have, for this segment of the show, a fascinating woman who is involved in the field of mediation. So please have a seat and learn a little bit about what mediation is and who this interesting woman is, Margaret Reis, JD. And so on that note, I'm going to begin our show today, and thank you for joining us. Well, how are you?
I'm great, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm awesome as always.
Good.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you as well, and to your viewers.
Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of your willingness to come on the show and to share with us and my viewers a little bit about your world and what makes it fascinating. So, Miss Rice, if I may call you.
You can call me Margaret
Oh,
if you
okay,
like.
I'll call you Margaret
Great,
then.
thank you.
Give me a little bit of background about your company and what were you thinking when you decided in 1994 to start this company? Because if I'm not mistaken, I've done my research, you were kind of one of the early pioneers in this whole concept of mediation. So let's talk about that.
All right. I was in that time frame, early 90s, I was practicing law in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my practice was focused on two areas, seemed different but in many ways very related. One was family law, divorce, custody issues. The other was criminal law.
Oh my goodness.
And while they seem to be very diverse, in some ways they are totally different groups of people. Mm-hmm. But as a wiser and older attorney said to me at the time, when you practice criminal law, you see bad people on their best day. And when you practice domestic law, you see good people on their worst.
Oh, that's so good.
And, there was a lot of truth to that. Mm-hmm. What I realized in dealing with those two groups of people is that the criminal clients that I represented, by and large, had fairly realistic expectations about what would happen. They knew that the hammer was coming down.
Okay.
And it was a matter of maybe not quite so hard, or maybe I can angle probation out of this one, or whatever. Some of them were innocent, and we tried a number of cases and were fairly successful. The domestic clients were totally unrealistic in their expectations by and large. So when folks are divorcing, it was not unusual for me as a legal practitioner to have a client come in and expect to get through that process and at the end be as well off, have as many resources, etc., as they did before the process started. And they totally set aside the reality that this group of people known as a family, instead of maintaining one house, was now going to maintain two. Instead of having one set of utility bills, would now have two, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So the resources did not go up. The demand went up for those resources. So obviously both parties were going to end up being feeling quite diminished at the end of that process.
What do you think, not to interrupt, because this is so, with so many people today going through the divorce process and coming to the table with these unrealistic expectations, especially females, because females, like it or not, oftentimes are the ones that have the children, have to deal with trying to juggle so many new things as a single woman versus a married woman. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that my father would always say that it's too easy to get divorced. I never thought it was easy to get divorced. Helping people through the process, it wouldn't occur to me to say, well, this is easy.
Right.
I always thought it was too easy to get married.
Actually, it is too easy to get married.
You just go down to the courthouse, you get a piece of paper, you find someone who's willing and licensed, and there you have it.
Yeah,
boom, it's done.
Yeah.
Getting divorced, I thought, was far more complex and costly and time consuming and emotionally draining and expensive.
Expensive, yes.
And so what I think about this, and frankly, given there are a lot of things that come into play when you're talking about people who are getting divorced, and I still deal with divorcing people all the time. It's really the majority of what I do as a mediator.
Okay.
But the real estate market, the impact of that market on people getting divorced, to me, is incredible. It's something that I don't think people generally consider. People can't afford to sell their home. They can't afford to stay in their home if they're splitting up. Now, instead of 2 incomes, there's only one.
Right.
And they can't sell it because they're underwater on that home.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
so give me that. Talk to me about that.
So,
okay.
So I say this only a little bit jokingly. I think we're going to raise generations of what I call mole children who grow up in their grandparents' basements because people are walking away from the house. They've got no money. They've got no ability to get into another home. They're moving in with their parents, and they're sleeping in the basement.
Right, they're sleeping in the basement with grandma.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're moving from mom's parents' home, where mom is living, they're with their mother, and staying in the basement, and they're going to dad's parents' home, where dad is living, and they're staying in the basement.
Geez, so tell me what is mediation, and how could the outcomes be different?
Well, let me go back a little bit and tell you how I got into mediation.
Okay, that'll be fine.
In 1993, I was, as I said, practicing law, and Beach Acres, which is a
very fine
wonderful organization in Cincinnati, grew out of I think the General Protestant Orphanage or Children's Home, now referred to as Beach Acres, was offering mediation training. And it was a week-long, 40 hours of training, very intensive. And I was becoming more and more disillusioned with my role as an advocate, as an attorney in the domestic relations courts.
Okay.
Because where there were battles over custody of children, and there were lots of battles over custody of children, some of that was emotional, some of that was sociological, some of that was financial. I don't want to pay child support, so I'm going to get custody. I need child support, so I'm going to get custody. I felt like I was part of one of the wheels that was grinding people up and spitting them out at the end and saying, oh, by the way, now that we have encouraged you and assisted you in destroying each other, go parent your children effectively.
Right. That's an oxymoron.
Isn't it? So when I heard about this opportunity for mediation training, my thought was, I'm going to see what this is all about. I'm going to take this training and see what this is all about. I think it's baloney.
Okay.
I think it's pie in the sky.
Okay.
So I took the training, and right then I was absolutely convinced that this was an effective alternative to driving people through that process of mutually assured destruction.
I like that term, mutually assured destruction.
Right.
And the children.
Sure. The children aren't there. That's the collateral damage.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Civilian casualties of the war that we call divorce. So I began to shift my practice in 1994, March, I think, early in the year. The training was in November. So we hardly got into the new year. My business partner and I formed Partners in Mediation Incorporated.
Okay.
And the partners are the people that come in, not the two of us. They are the partners in mediation.
Yes.
They are partnering.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and that was her idea, Barbara Dahl, my business partner. And we have worked together since.
Okay.
We were working together before that. So we formed this business and started providing mediation services. And in the beginning, we were both so nervous, you know, green as green could be, that we co-mediated. So we would both mediate with a couple that was going through divorce, because if I got stuck, maybe she would be able to help, or if she got stuck, I might have something to say. So we do not do that anymore. It didn't take us too long to get enough confidence to do that on our own.
So now let me interrupt. How did you get, when you became a disciple of the process of mediation and a believer, which is powerful, but how did you get your clients initially?
Well, for me, it was relatively easy, and that's because, if I can back up again a little bit, in the domestic relations courts, there is was a fairly cohesive group of attorneys who practiced in that court.
Okay.
And if you practiced in the court, you knew the people in the court. You knew the other attorneys. So when I became available to provide mediation services, those attorneys that I had been working with, working against, having cases with, seeing in the courthouse, whatever it may be, who had respect for me, and I believe many of them did,
yes,
would refer cases to me.
Oh, that's very nice.
Because there are few attorneys, few good attorneys, very few, who I would consider to be good, top-notch attorneys who would prefer to litigate than to negotiate a resolution. And the fact of the matter is, most cases in domestic court were negotiated. There were very few that were actually tried, but the ones that were tried were heartbreaking.
God.
So, you know, most attorneys who have these cases would prefer to have the clients work out the agreements with their assistance and with their advice and counsel, so that they make smart agreements.
Okay.
So they were happy to refer cases.
So tell me the process.
Well, the process of mediation, let me tell you what mediation is first.
All right.
Mediation is a voluntary process.
Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Okay.
In which the parties to the dispute negotiate with each other with the assistance of a third party impartial facilitator.
That's you.
Me, the mediator.
Okay.
So the mediator's job is to facilitate the communication and the negotiation that goes on between the parties to the dispute, so that they can explore the issues that they are in dispute about. They can explore options about how to resolve those issues, and they can come to agreement about mutually acceptable resolutions.
And that can occur through the use of a third party impartial?
Sure.
Okay.
Because I say this to people when I do an orientation, which is part of our mediation process. When I'm in a dispute, I know that there are two ways to resolve the dispute. I may have said this to you before, Michelle, I don't know. There's my way, also known as the right way, and there's your way, also known as the wrong way.
Right.
So what I have found personally, and I say this to my mediation clients, it's a challenge to them. If I am able to look at this dispute from your perspective, not that I think your perspective is better than mine. Of course, it's the wrong perspective. I've already established that.
Right.
But if I just look at it from your perspective, oftentimes what I understand is you're at one end of the fence and I'm at the other, but there's a lot of fence in between.
Yes, there is.
And I've not considered anything other than the two options that I've been presented with. The one that I've developed, which of course is the right one, and the one that you've developed, of course, the wrong one. So when I begin to see that there are countless other options available, any number of which may be acceptable to me, any number of which may be acceptable to you as well. And where there's overlap, where you and I agree that this option
intersection of interests
is better, we can agree to resolve the dispute. And you go away happy, and I go away happy. So the mediation process is, first of all, voluntary.
Okay.
Secondly, it's confidential. And this is not true in court. So, you know, when the skeletons are going to come out of the closet, you can talk to the court, and the court reporter will take it down, and anyone can sit in the courthouse, in the courtroom, and listen. Or you can come to a mediator where it's confidential.
That's powerful.
It is powerful. It's extraordinarily powerful.
That's powerful.
Not only is it confidential in Ohio, it's confidential because in our agreement to mediate our contract with our clients, it says it's confidential, that we will maintain confidentiality about whatever is said in the mediation, with a few exceptions, and they are important. If there are previously unreported allegations of child abuse, elder abuse, or threats of harm to self or others, we retain the right as the mediator to make a report to the appropriate authority. So don't come into the mediation and tell me that you have your child chained up to the radiator, because I'm going to have to make the report, and I will make the report, and I retain the right to do that.
That's still very reasonable.
Absolutely.
And absolutely required, I would think, if you're going to be a fiduciary, wouldn't you say, in some way?
I think for many mediators who have a license issued by the state or some sort of certification issued by the state, so that would be teachers, social workers, any mental health professional, any law enforcement person, any clergy, any health care educator, did I already say this? Attorneys are mandated reporters. They are required by the state to make those reports. Mediators as a group are not mandated reporters, but most mediators have an underlying professional license that makes them a mandated reporter anyway.
Oh, okay.
Just to be clear, we put that in our agreement to mediate. So people have an opportunity to read that, to review it, to talk to their attorney about it, whatever they want to do before they sign it and say, I understand that you as the mediator retain the right to make those very limited specific reports if appropriate.
I think that's quite appropriate. Now let me ask you this. Who uses mediation?
Well, anybody can, whoever is in a dispute, whoever has a disagreement, a conflict, can call a mediator and ask for a mediator's assistance to resolve that conflict or that dispute.
So that would be far greater than just divorce.
Oh, certainly.
That's business conflicts,
yes.
Family.
All kinds of family conflicts. I say the majority of my work as a mediator is with families in transition.
Now what does that mean?
How do you define your family? Is there a transition point going on? Change is difficult for people.
Yes.
Change means that something fundamental is shifting in your world. That throws us off balance as humans. And we sometimes react well and sometimes not so well to those shifts. You know, when you're on the deck of the Titanic, what do? You feel like you're going down. You don't have to go down.
Right.
So I say when there's conflict, there's going to be change. That change can be change for the better, or it can be change for the worse.
So how do you find a mediator?
Well, there are, first of all, in most counties in Ohio.
Okay.
And I think there are folks in Kentucky that might hear this. Kentucky has a statewide registry of mediators, but in most counties in Ohio doesn't have a statewide registry. The state does not maintain that.
Okay.
But the local courts, and typically it's going to be the domestic relations court or the juvenile court, will maintain a list of what the court considers to be qualified mediators. And there is a little bit of guidance from the state on this.
Okay.
Not a lot.
Okay.
But there would be a minimum requirement of about 52 hours of mediation training to be qualified. There are typically requirements regarding education or equivalent life experience. Probably some requirement with regard to experience working with families.
Okay.
And that can be professional experience, that can be personal experience.
Okay.
And typically that the mediator maintains malpractice insurance.
Of course, yes.
Which is a relatively inexpensive proposition for mediators. And Kentucky additionally requires that there be ongoing mediation education, a requirement that I find to be absolutely wonderful.
I
and
think,
I wish
yes,
that Ohio
continuing
would,
ed, yeah.
Yes. And initially that a new mediator spend in Kentucky 15 and in Ohio 20 hours working with an established mediator as in a mentoring situation.
Okay, because
so
I was
that
going to
there be
ask
a little
about
bit of-
that. How do you mentor under someone when you're just getting started, or you just kind of work your way through it?
Well, in both Ohio and Kentucky, there is this requirement. It's not overwhelming. I certainly think 20 hours is
That's not
fairly minimal.
Yeah, it is, right.
Before you're unleashed on the public. So I think the power in mediation is that the mediator claims no power to make decisions or give advice about what the parties should do. The power rests solely with the parties to the dispute.
Now, how does that work?
Well, for example, when folks come in a divorce situation, since we've talked about that, they need to make a lot of decisions. Divorce covers a wide range of issues, and those break down not extremely neatly, but fairly logically into two categories. One has to do with property. What do they do with not only the assets but the debts? The other, and more important, has to do with parenting. So where they have children, minor children, or children who are disabled and not minors who need ongoing care, they need to make decisions about how that child or those children will be parented moving forward. So it's not unusual for parents who are, let's say, talking about the parenting issues to say, well, what do you think we should do? They'll say that to me as the mediator. And my response is typically this: I don't know your children. I wouldn't know them if they walked in the door, other than how they would react to the two of you sitting here. I might assume that a small child running up and saying, "Mommy," is your child.
Right.
But because I don't know your children, I have no expertise in what's best for that child. I believe that parents coming into divorce, and I am willing to be convinced otherwise, sometimes I am, but not very often. I believe that parents want what's best for their children.
That's the hope.
That's the hope. And I think it's, by and large, it's true. That doesn't mean they agree on what's best for the children. It means that they each have an idea of what's best for the children, and they want to see that implemented. I want what's best for their children, but that's a generic, I like humanity and I hope everyone does well kind of.
Right. Have a nice day type thing.
Yes. I don't know, because I don't know their children, I don't know what's best. I don't know if those children need to be home at 8 o'clock from the other parent's home so that they have an hour to unwind so that they can get to sleep at 9, or if they can walk in at 5 minutes till 9, throw on their pajamas, jump in bed, and they're asleep. Now, I don't know that. How would I know?
Right.
So I don't know what makes more sense for those children. They know. They bring all of the expertise. They know where their issues are. They know where their disagreements are. I don't know that. I mean, we can talk about it and they can share that with me. But because they know what goes on in their lives, they live their lives. I don't live their lives. And no matter how much they tell me about their lives, I won't know everything. So they know, and they have the power to make the decisions. And it's my job to help them, for example, challenge them to see a disputed issue from the other's perspective so that they can see that there may be a whole range of options that they had not previously considered.
That is very powerful. I hate to keep using this, but this is so not like the legal system. I have real troubles with what happens in the legal system. Now, are the consequences of mediation binding?
Well, they can be, and certainly when people spend their time, energy, and money coming to mediation and they reach agreements, in our private practice, we do not ask them to sign off on those agreements. And this is the reason why.
Okay.
When I was practicing law, I was pretty jealous of my relationship with my client. I anticipate that the same is true when a mediation client comes into mediation. That mediation client may or probably has an attorney out there who has that relationship with that client. I don't want that client to sign an agreement without the advice and counsel of their attorney and then go to the attorney and say, here's the agreement, and the attorney, just be outraged and want to tear it up and say that I am now representing their client. I don't want to do that.
Okay.
That's not my job. I don't practice law anymore. I'm a mediator. So what we do is draft the agreement. We send it out to the clients.
Okay.
I don't send it to the attorneys because it's a confidential process.
Oh my goodness, you're right. Okay.
I'm sending it to my clients. And I say, in a cover letter, please take this to your attorneys. Your attorney, go to your attorneys with this agreement. Explain the process that you use to come to these agreements. Explain why you agreed to pay more child support than you might be required to pay, or to accept less than you might be allocated should you go to court. What's in it for you? Explain that to your attorney. And I expect that the attorneys have questions about the agreement, because each has given up things that they might otherwise get in court.
Right.
But they've done that for reasons that they understand. It may be worth my while to give you more than you might be entitled to in court if in return I get your goodwill.
Yes.
Okay?
Right. Because it was a marital relationship. You don't want War of the Roses. I mean,
no.
Just ghastly.
Yeah, it's extraordinary what the legal system can lead people to do in an adversarial process. And another thing I say to my clients, you are involved in the most intimate relationship that we as humans engage in a marriage, in a family. And I personally don't believe that that belongs in a court. Work it out. They can work it out. 95% of people can work out their disagreements, their disputes, their conflicts in mediation and avoid the turmoil and the heartache that comes from being involved in a litigation.
And the expense.
Now, there's expense to
mediation. Sure, of course.
But it's would be involved in litigation.
I have to believe. So let's shift. You mediate the divorce. Let's talk about some other things, because I kind of alluded to that with the business and also with families. And the real issue, as I see it emerging, is this issue of the elderly.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about that, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Some of the most rewarding work I've done has been with families involved in making decisions, care decisions for elderly and sometimes disabled parents.
Okay.
And also working with elderly parents who are frankly heartbroken because some or one of their children isn't talking to the other, or not talking to the parents. So this kind of family conferencing idea, almost a reconciliation, but you know, it's a real privilege for people to trust you enough to have you involved in that discussion. Let me give you an example. Not so long ago, Barbara, my business partner, and I co-mediated a situation where there were about 7 or 8 siblings.
Okay.
Parents were deceased, and one of them, and I think he was one of the younger ones, his wife had died when he had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The wife had died when they were fairly young, 6, 7, 8 kind of years old. And at the age of, I'm going to say, mid-50s, late 50s, he had a stroke.
Ooh.
Now these young adults, now they're adults, his
Yes,
children,
right.
are providing care for him. The siblings were dissatisfied with the care that these young people were providing to their parent, to their father.
Father, yes.
He was in one facility and they moved him to a different facility. The siblings didn't like the new facility. It was inconvenient for some. It was, and these siblings were tremendously involved. They would sit with him all day. One would come in, you know,
Yes.
Mary's got Mondays and Sally's got Tuesdays and Joe has Wednesdays, all day. Sit with him. He would never be alone.
Oh, that's amazing.
So there was a tremendous amount of loyalty and love that was poured out by these siblings for their brother.
Okay.
Not so much for their niece and nephew, the youngsters. And again, mid-20s. This is a huge responsibility to dump
caregiving.
on these. I think of them as children,
They
certainly are adults and
sorta.
legally.
Legally, okay.
So we were able to work through some of those issues and help the young people, the niece and nephew, effectively communicate and sort of reinforce the fact that they were legally the decision makers for their father.
Okay.
They were the ones who were going to be calling the shots. They were very grateful for the help and assistance and counsel that their aunts and uncles were providing.
Okay.
But there's a limit. Thank you for telling me what you think. We will now make a decision and let you know. And that the brothers and sisters weren't going to be running the show for their brother, but their involvement was still appreciated.
Well, you know, that's tough though, Margaret, because generationally, and I can say that because I'm a senior now, and young people have a very different value system.
Yes.
And how they do things, which is, well, I heard you, and I'm processing it, but this is what I'm doing. And you're like, if you heard me, why aren't you integrating this into your plan?
Right.
And it's just a generational thing. It just really is.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and it can be difficult.
Yes.
And I think it took quite a bit of courage for these 2 young people to agree to come to mediation and stand up to their elders.
I think it did. I have to applaud them. I don't know if I could have.
I don't know if I could have or would have. I come from, my dad was one of 13 children.
Okay.
I would not want to sit down with that crew. And they're all gone. God save them. They're wonderful people, and he came from a great family. And my mother was one of 11.
Oh my gosh.
I wouldn't want to sit down with that crew either. And they are all gone as well. But with all the saints in heaven, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it took a lot of courage for them to come, and they were very controlled. They didn't lash out, which, you know, I think is something that we kind of think might happen, that you would lash out at someone. In mediation, we experience the blame, justify, defend cycle, where it just goes around and around and there's no way out.
Yes, the rat in the cage.
Yes.
So you call it blame, justify, and defend.
Yeah. People become defensive. They, you know, and what happens when you think of a defensive posture? You know, people are hiding behind tables, and they've got turrets built and little slots to shoot their arrows through. But there's not a lot of contact. There's not a lot of positive exchange. So if we can keep people from getting into that cycle, we find that their exchanges tend to be more positive, that they can be heard more easily. And it's in hearing that I find that, frankly, sometimes you see the scales falling from people's eyes, that they begin to understand what has happened.
Yes.
And oftentimes what's happened is, I have expectations for how you will behave. I may not speak those, I may not write them down, I may not convey them to you in any way, shape, or form. What I will convey is my extreme disappointment when you do not fulfill my expectations. I make assumptions. I expect that you will act upon my assumptions. You've made different assumptions, and you expect that I will act upon yours. And now we're in a battle.
So how does one, well, let me just say this. In your mediation, how powerful is the role of forgiveness? Because when you're dealing with family issues, and I'm talking about the corpse that just wasn't buried,
yes,
and it burps up, and it burps up, and you're like, my God, it's still there.
Yes.
How do you move beyond that?
Well, it's there because the problem has never been solved.
Sometimes it can't be solved.
Then there has to be an understanding that it can't be solved. And mediators use a number of techniques. And the most important thing a mediator can do is to listen, and to listen actively to what both parties are saying. And I say both parties. Typically there are two people involved in a dispute. There could be 3, 4, 5, 15. God.
Oh.
I don't
getting
know,
a headache, Margaret.
I don't know if you remember, I'm old enough to remember the fellow on the Ed Sullivan show who used to spin the plates.
Yes, I am definitely
and
on
he'd
that
go down
group.
the row, and then the very first one would be ready to topple, and he'd have to come back and catch that one and this one. Sometimes that's what it's like being a mediator.
Goodness gracious.
You have to keep all those plates spinning. But we use lots of communication techniques, restating, reframing, reflecting. Sometimes it's enough just to reflect back and say, you seem really saddened by that. And, you know, a person who hears that, who is saddened by what they've heard,
yes,
feels as though they have somehow been validated, and their feelings have been validated. Mediators don't have to be therapists. I don't have any therapy background at all. But I think you can be an empathetic listener, and you can reflect back what you hear. Sometimes people are in the same room, they can't hear each other because of the tone of voice. I have so blocked out your voice because I'm so tired of your nagging.
Yes.
Hear that all. So when you say, the problem is that he doesn't provide enough money for me to pay for the school lunches for the children, he can't hear you say that.
So what does he hear, Margaret?
You know,
okay.
The Charlie Brown, when the adults talk, So then I say, so Michelle, what I hear you saying is that he's not providing enough money for you to pay for the children's school lunches. Is that correct? Now, I've done a couple of things there. I've reflected back what you've said. I've checked in to make sure that I'm accurate. And he can hear my voice, because my voice hasn't been involved in the nagging. Now, so you say, yes, that's what I've heard, and I would then look at him and say, did you hear that? And when he says, oh yeah, I heard it. What did you hear? Because sometimes you'll get, she thinks I'm a cheapskate.
Okay.
And what I say is, oddly enough, I did not hear that. I didn't hear that. Let's try again. Michelle, what is it that you're saying? And you're saying he's not providing enough money for the school lunches. And I'll say, what did you hear that time? Something about school lunches. You know, I mean,
yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you have to take a hammer and chisel and get through the brick wall that's been developed. But you get through. And sooner or later, he's going to hear that you need more money for the children's school lunches. And then, now we have the dispute. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. The problem is not him. The problem is not you. The problem is, how do you pay for the school lunches?
Crisp. Problem statement.
Yes, not personal.
Right.
You look at him, he looks at you, and you fight with each other. The problem is out here just getting bigger and bigger and bigger because you're not paying any attention to the problem. You're just bickering with each other. That's what happens so many times. And when people can begin to focus on the problem and not focus on each other as the embodiment of the problem.
Yes.
The problem is not you, it's not him, it's out here, it's different. So the mediator will help that focus. We use a flip chart. It's a very low tech kind of flip chart and markers. And sometimes I'll write you and me and this back and forth stuff, and here's the problem out here. And what I want you to do, the two of you, is instead of focusing on the other one, I want you to focus on the problem. Focus on the problem.
See, this is what I think is so great, because in a courtroom situation, you don't get the opportunity to have a problem statement. It's very cut and dry.
Right.
That has been my experience, because I have been divorced, and God knows I should have opted for mediation. But you know, you have these pie in the sky presumptions about what the court system will do. And viewers, listen to me carefully and clearly. You need to mediate. Do not bring that trash into the court, because you may not have an outcome that you particularly like. Am I correct?
Well, the courts are governed by the laws, and the laws are meant to do the best for the most.
Equity.
But it's not, is it always the best for you personally? I think if you were anyone who has a dispute, who would like to retain control over how that dispute is resolved.
Right.
Understand that you can do that in mediation. It's one of the few ways that you can do it.
Can you mediate on settlement disagreements, moving beyond family, but in a situation where you've been injured and neither party can come to a reconciliation? Is that a mediating type of thing?
I would say that if you are involved in a dispute, you can mediate it.
Okay.
Any dispute.
And the court is okay with that? Yes.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Absolutely. From neighbors who are complaining about the fact that my tree is shedding its leaves on your yard.
Yes.
Fence line disputes, barking dogs, loud music, whatever it may be, all the way up to personal injury, medical malpractice, any in terms of dollars, certainly divorce, parenting, what many understand as custody disputes, never married parents, gay and lesbian relationships. Those folks have no recourse to the courts in Ohio at this point. You know, I mean, you cannot.
Seriously?
Well, what are they going to do?
If a gay couple has a child, and
they can go to juvenile court and argue about custody, but they have no. But they won't go as
As
parents,
parents.
there is probably a parent, unless there's an adoption, and there is the possibility in Ohio of filing a parenting agreement in juvenile court for gay or lesbian parents. But there are property issues. They buy a house together. They have bank accounts together. They have Visa cards and MasterCards. And
we live in an incredibly complex world today.
And the more complex it is, just understand that because the courts are required to interpret and apply the law, the law hasn't always caught up with the complexity of our lives.
I believe that.
Well,
laws take time.
Think about, you can think about decisions regarding whether or not the NSA can listen to our phone calls. Those laws were developed in the 90s, and things are different now.
Yes, they are.
I will tell you, just as an example, 1993, I went to mediation training for the first time. At every break, everyone lined up against the back wall to use the one telephone that was hanging on the wall. There is no phone on the wall.
You can't find a phone.
That's right. Everybody has a phone in their pocket.
Right.
So from monitoring the calls that were made on that telephone, as opposed to monitoring the calls that go through the airways, no wires involved.
Right.
Totally different. But the laws are still the same. So it takes a long time for laws to catch up with our reality. And yes, we live in a very complex world. And yes, you know, things go into court and they get mired there. You know, the worst thing is that in a civil case, such as a breach of contract, a personal injury, automobile accident kind of case, medical malpractice, you file your suit today, let's say January 7th, 2014, maybe by the 20s, you'll have a resolution.
Yeah.
Or 2017 or 2018. Yeah. And in the meantime, that litigation will eat you from the inside out.
That, Margaret, you crystallized my sentiments, because the court system is so backlogged.
Yes.
And it's so much going on today that was unthinkable 20 years ago.
Precisely.
And the numbers continue. And I think there's an incredible naivete by the American consumer population that suing will get you expected outcomes. And it just doesn't work like that. This issue of equity, this is something I learned when I worked for attorneys in grad school, and I couldn't understand. And they said, Michelle, it's not about justice, it's about equity, equity, equity. And
that has a strange definition, too.
Oh, it has a real strange...
When you get into court.
Yeah, equity. And I'm like, oh, equity sounds like I'm screwed. Yes, you figured out what equity means. Now, let me talk briefly. What is the cost of mediation?
Well, I can only talk about the cost from our perspective at Partners in Mediation. We consider ourselves dispute resolution professionals. That's what we do.
That's correct.
Are professionals in the dispute resolution field. And we would also put in that field attorneys.
Okay.
They are professionals in dispute resolution. They use a different process.
Okay.
We use a mediation process. They use the legal process. So we try to coordinate our fees to a certain extent with what we see as the prevailing rate among attorneys in the area in which we practice. So right now we're at about $200 an hour.
Okay.
And that fee is divided by the parties, so they're paying $100 an hour. That's probably low.
I think it is.
In the Cincinnati area where we have our primary offices, I think the legal fees are higher than that, $250 into the $300 range. Yeah. Typically, with some attorneys going at the $500 range.
Yeah, on a divorce, yeah.
And
gets pricey.
So we're at $200.
Okay.
And now, if we were to go to southeastern Ohio to do a mediation, our fees might be different.
Okay.
because the legal fees in those communities are different. So there might be some modification.
Okay.
But, you know, basically we practice in the Cincinnati area and points north and northern Kentucky.
You go up into Dayton and further north, or just mainly Cincinnati?
Well, we have offices on the north side of Cincinnati.
Okay.
We're in Westchester, Mason,
Okay.
Blue Ash.
Okay.
On the east side in Anderson, we're
Okay.
in Florence, Kentucky.
Okay. Okay.
So-
for my viewers over there. Good.
Right.
Good. Good.
And so that's where we have offices. Now, we don't have to meet in our office. One of the things with this, you were talking about elder
Yes.
mediation
Yes.
previously. Well, when you have an elder who's housed in a nursing home or rehab facility, they're not coming to your office. You're going to their office. You're going to their facility where they are housed, and you're going to have your meeting there.
Okay.
Because that's where they are.
That's really where they are. Do you ever run into issues around this emerging epidemic with Alzheimer?
Yes, and sometimes that's problematic because you have an elderly parent, for example, who suffers from dementia, or Alzheimer's,
Right.
or stroke,
Right.
and that person may be present to a certain extent and absent to another extent.
Yes.
But may have very strong feelings about his or her personal care. I don't want to go to a nursing home. I don't want to go to, that may be the only thing they can say with any clarity. I don't
Yeah.
want to go to a nursing home.
Yes.
But there's really no effective way to provide care in the home.
Right.
So we will always try to involve that person to the extent at all possible. Now,
Right.
it's not always appropriate.
Right.
But if it is, we want that person involved in the discussion about the care. So that
I think seniors are very, very concerned about being involved in their
Right.
life story.
absolutely.
But
because
Alzheimer and cognitive impairments, well, that's a different thing. I mean,
yes, but until people get to a certain point in Alzheimer's, they can still
Oh, yeah.
participate
Oh, yeah.
in the discussion.
Okay.
Then they get to the point where, you know, they are pretty much in their own world.
yeah. We have run out of time.
I cannot believe that.
I told you I need you to give them your phone number twice and
Okay.
speak slowly.
Okay. So you can reach me or my business partner, Barbara Dahl,
Okay.
at 513-651-1010. That's the office number.
Okay.
And we'll
Say it again.
answer that phone almost all the time,
Yes.
except in the next 5 minutes. Again, that's 513-651-1010.
I think this discussion has been extremely enlightening for myself and beneficial to viewers, because people do need to know that as long as you're interfacing with other people, there's always a possibility of conflict.
Right.
Always. There's no way two people can be together for long periods of time without having to, quote, work it out.
That's right.
Whether it's your neighbor or your employer or your wife or spouse, or all these things that come with relationships. And I think you bring such benefit, really, to working things out in a reasonable way. Not to infer that the court system is not reasonable, but the reality and the practicalities are that I think you bring a kinder, gentler approach to resolving difficult issues.
Yes.
And I think
I'd like
that
to
is the
think-
power of mediation.
Well, thank you, Michelle.
And I am delighted to have you on as my guest, Ms. Margaret Reis. And on that note today, for those of you that have been listening, wasn't that fascinating? Really? I wish I'd known about her, because I'm telling you, legal fees and fighting and just, you know what?
And then there's the therapy.
Oh, we don't want to go into now I'm crazy, okay? So on that note, I thank all of you for being a part of my world today with Margaret Reis, who is Partners in Mediation headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. And thank you so much for being a part of my world. As always, you have an amazing day, and God bless. You take care.